I have 8 scripture readings today. So I'm not going to read them because it's a long story. But if you got your worship guide, read those when you get home, and I'm going to summarize the story for you. As with most stories in the Bible, it's told from the male perspective. So we're going to have to work a little harder to understand what was going on with the women in the story, what they're thinking, and why they did the things they did. Last week, we were talking about Abraham, and Abraham and Sarah finally had a child named Isaac. Well, now time has progressed, and it's time for Isaac to get married. And because this was biblical times, they did not have all these dating apps on their phones. So what they did instead was one of Abraham's servants went out, and on the way to somewhere, he was going to find a wife for Isaac. Now we remember that marriage in those days was more about property, keeping family property in the family. If a couple actually loved each other, that was just a bonus. That was not the main goal. So the servant is about ready to stop for a drink and to water his camels. So he prays to God and says, "Let the first woman who comes and offers me a drink and then offers to water my camels be the one that will marry Isaac." Well, I suppose it could work as well as any other method we do these days. And so, as he's sitting by the well, Rebecca comes up. And Rebecca gives him some water and offers to water his animals. And so the servant says, "Awesome, she's the one." So he offers her a nose ring and bracelets, 2 bracelets, and asks if he can spend the night at her father's house. Did you know they did nose piercing back then? That was the first I'd seen that. I thought that was a modern thing. So she got her nose ring and 2 bracelets. So she took him home with her, and he stayed, and the servant thanked God, and he asked Rebecca's family if she could come with him to marry Isaac. And he gave them gold and silver and garments, and he gave those things to Rebecca, but he also gave her mother and brother costly ornaments. The nice thing about this story is they actually asked Rebecca if she wanted to go. Often these arrangements were just made and the woman went. It wasn't a choice. So she at least got a choice, but what is she choosing? She's choosing a man she's never seen, a family she doesn't know. She's leaving her home, but she was good with that. So she went off with her nurse and some maids. And then the servant brought Rebecca to Isaac and told him what he had done, and Rebecca became Isaac's wife. Now the story says that Isaac came to love Rebecca, so that was bonus points, because it really didn't matter whether he did or not. It was just nice that he did. And like Abraham and Sarah, they didn't have children for a long time. And God finally granted Isaac's prayer to have children. And Rebecca had twins. Anybody remember their names? Esau and Jacob. And it's funny, the story says, even in the womb, these two were fighting with each other. Anybody ever had twins? That's pretty much going to be the case with any twins, I think, because they're all trying to find a place in a tight spot. Isaac was 60 when the boys were born. We don't know how old Rebekah was. But the boys grew up, and Esau was a hunter, and he was the outdoorsman. And his father loved him because those were the things he liked. Jacob was not so much the hunter-gatherer type, and Isaac didn't really ever develop much of a relationship with him, but he was Rebekah's favorite. Now think about this. We have two parents, each with a favorite child. Thank goodness they didn't have a third, because that one, who knows what would have happened. And we think back to that place where it says, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples born of you shall be divided. One shall be stronger than the other. The elder shall serve the younger." The prophecy that comes true as the story progresses. The next thing of importance that we remember about this story is the story of the stew. You remember that one? Jacob had been cooking stew, and Esau came in from hunting, working in the fields, and he had a huge appetite. Think farmers. If you've been out working in the field all day, if you've been doing heavy labor, how hungry are you? And Esau came in, and he was starving, and asked for a bowl of stew. Jacob is kind of a manipulative guy, and he says, "What'll you give me for it?" "Oh, I'll give you anything because I'm starving." "Well, give me your birthright." And Esau said, "Well, my birthright won't do me any good if I die of hunger, so fine." So Esau has now given Jacob the double portion of the inheritance because he was hungry. And then once he realized he had done that, he thought, that was maybe not my best choice. But he stood by his word, and he let it go. When Esau was 40, he got married. He married 2 Hittite women, and the story doesn't tell us a whole lot about them, except Rebekah said they made her life miserable. Now, do you suppose maybe that could be because she favored her other son? This is the first story in the Bible that I know of with in-law problems. And I would not be surprised if it goes back to one parent favors one child and one favors the other. So those of us who are parents, don't do that. It's a bad thing. So now Jacob is nearing death, or Isaac is nearing death, and he tells Esau to go out and hunt and bring back the meat and make the stew that he loves because he's about to die. And Isaac is pretty much blind as a bat at this point. So Rebekah overheard this, and as soon as Esau got out of the house, she made a stew and gave it to Jacob to take into his father, because his father meant to bless Esau before he died, the blessing one gives to the oldest child. And Jacob says, well, he's not going to mistake me for Esau. The first thing he's going to do is touch me. And Esau was a very hairy guy. Some guys just have more arm hair, more facial hair, more hair than others. So his mother gave him an animal skin to put on his arms, so that when his father reached out to touch him, he would feel all that hair. And it worked like a charm. Jacob took in the stew, His father felt his arm, felt all that hair, ate the stew, and gave him the blessing meant for the firstborn child. Imagine coming home as the firstborn child and discovering that not only have you given away your birthright because your brother is a manipulative jerk, but now your brother, the manipulative jerk, has also gotten your blessing, which was the only thing he was going to get that was any better. He was pretty ticked. And because he was so angry, Rebekah and Jacob thought Jacob's life was in danger, so Rebekah sent him to live with her relatives. Go stay with my brother until Esau gets over being so mad. Think about it. How long would it take you to get over being that mad? So Jacob went, and the first person he met was Rachel. And he fell head over heels in love with Rachel. And so he talked to his uncle, Laban, and said, "Could I marry Rachel?" And Laban is also a manipulative, lying person. And he says, "What do I get out of it?" So Jacob says, "Well, I will work for you for no pay for 7 years if you'll let me marry Rachel." So Laban says, "Fine, deal." So for 7 years, Jacob works. And now the time has come, and he goes in and he says, "I've worked my 7 years. I want to marry Rachel." Well, Rachel has an older sister, and the custom is older sisters get married first. But he doesn't mention any of that. Laban says nothing about that. He has a big party, and they get married. And this is why, gentlemen, you should not let your wife wear a veil. Because Laban got a little sneaky. And instead of marrying Rachel, Jacob married Leah. Now think about this. Jacob's mad because he got taken advantage of. Well, when you're a dishonest person yourself, you shouldn't be surprised when people take advantage. But think about Rachel. Rachel also loved him. She also loved Jacob. She wants to marry Jacob. They have spent 7 years looking at each other over the dinner table, living in the same family compound. And she doesn't get to marry him. Her sister does. How would you feel? How betrayed would you feel that your father thought so little of you that he promised your hand in marriage and then didn't let you get married? And think about Leah, who gets married but knows, I'm not the one he loves my sister. And they all live together. You can't even move to the next town so you don't have to see him at dinner every day. Think about what living in that household was like. So then, of course, Jacob is really upset, and Laban says, "Well, if you'll work 7 more years for free, you can have Rachel too." So he did. That's some love there. Don't know that I'd have gone there. I think I'd have just taken Rachel and hit the road, but he has mended his ways and he's trying to be honest. And for this whole time that Jacob is working for Laban, he's supposed to be getting paid in livestock. Except every time he starts to build up some flocks, Laban changes the goal line. You can only have the sheep and goats that are black, because most of them, the ones in his flock, were white. Well, then they had a bumper crop of black ones. Laban was mad because it didn't work. So then he said, well, you can only have the ones that are both black and white. And wouldn't you know, they had a bumper crop of animals that were both black and white. Every time Laban changed the rules, it worked in Jacob's favor. So in all of this, as the livestock thing is going on, we also have a problem with children. Because, of course, a woman has no value unless they have especially sons. So because God saw that Jacob didn't love Leah as much as he loved Rachel, in the course of time, allowed Leah to have 4 sons: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Those might sound like familiar names. So now Rachel is upset because her sister has 4 sons and she has no children of her own. So she finally gives Jacob a maid, Bilhah. And with Bilhah, he has 2 sons, Dan and Naphtali. Then Leah saw she wasn't going to have any more children, or she at least thought she would have no more. So she gave Jacob her maid, Zilpah. And Zilpah gave Jacob 2 sons, Gad and Asher. Then Rachel made a deal with her sister for some produce and sent Jacob back to her, and Leah had 3 more children: Issachar, Zebulun, and a daughter, Dinah. So now we're getting up there. He's getting kids all over the place. Then Rachel had another son, Joseph. And we all know who Joseph was. And during the time that Jacob has lived with his uncle's family, we're still getting the livestock. We're now building up towards 12 children. And Laban is mad because Jacob is successful. He's having lots of sons. And the cousins are getting a little upset because they're seeing their chances of inheriting anything worth having dwindling. The more people you have, the more ways it's got to be cut. So Jacob realizes it's not safe. So he packs up his wives, his kids, everything, livestock, and they leave in the middle of the night. And Laban finds out and he's not happy, so he sends servants after him and goes with them himself. And when he catches up with them, he realizes he can't really say much that he took his wives and his kids. He can't really say too much because he took the livestock that was his. But he accused Jacob of stealing their household gods. And Jacob says, no, I didn't do that. And to prove it, you can search everything you want to search, because I don't have them. I didn't take them. So he does search. What Jacob didn't know was Rachel took them. And wherever it was she had them hid, she sat on it like a chest. She just sat on it. So nobody asked her to move, but they didn't find them. Interesting stories we learn here. If you steal something, sit on it, and nobody will ask you to move. Okay. See, I said, it's like a soap opera. I don't know how many of you guys watch soap operas, but yeah, this is like a weekday soap opera. So they wound up in Bethlehem, Jacob's home. And Rachel gave birth to her last son, Benjamin. The birth was difficult, and Rachel died. So now Jacob has 12 sons who wind up being the 12 tribes of Israel, and one daughter. And we don't hear very much at all about that daughter. And I'm deciding whether we'll hear about her next week or not. So you'll have to stay tuned for that one. So think of all the stuff that has gone on in this story and how much of it is because people were not honest with each other. Jacob tricked his brother. His parents had favorites and played them against each other. And then they had in-law problems because the first son, who was getting a raw deal all the way around, did not appreciate that. And, if the son is getting a raw deal all the way around, the wives probably are too. We don't know that, but we know human nature. How would you feel? Would you want to be any of the women in the story? I don't think I would. Leah gets married to somebody that doesn't want to marry her. Rachel has to wait to get married and then see the guy she loves be with 3 other women. Then we have 2 slaves who get no choice in the matter at all. This is not a culture that's helpful for women. They're all stuck in society rules. So my question for us is, how do we deal with honesty? Do we tell the complete truth all the time? Probably not, because sometimes the complete truth can be hurtful. But there are ways to tell the truth in loving ways. There are ways that we can be honest with one another. It's always a good thing if we have a problem with someone to just go to someone and say, look, I got a problem. It's always a good thing if you do something wrong to just fess up and take your consequences. You might not like them, but at least you get it over with. You don't have to worry about it. Don't you remember doing anything wrong as a child and just waiting for your parents to find out? I have 1 or 2 my mother never found out about. I could tell those stories now because she's no longer alive. But it's so much better just to tell the truth, just to be honest, not to use people to work with them. And maybe those are the lessons we need to learn. But what a tangled web we weave, and first we practice to deceive. I pray that we can learn that honesty is the best policy. Amen.